Hello and welcome to another episode of Boring History. My name is Angela and today we're going to be discussing the Tatzelwurm. So, Tatzelwurms, what are they? Well, they're said to be this wonderful little-ish creature that reside in the Swiss, Bavarian and Austrian Alps. They're also surprisingly often spotted by both farmers and travellers. The name is derived from the German word for paw and worm, so already just by the name we know they're going to be something slightly adorable looking. However, there are also a few slight different variations or different versions of what this creature is called. For example, in Tyrol they're called Springwurm, which means jumping worm. Now, if the name jumping worm is causing you to have flashbacks to our Aufhocker, fear not, because there are no known instances of Tatzelwurm poisoning. So unlike our Aufhocker, Tatzelwurms aren't a bad creature per se, however they can be slightly aggressive if they feel threatened. Tatzelwurms are said to most commonly appear just before massive storms that occur after a long dry spell. Interestingly, they're actually described in an 1836 Bavarian handbook that was published for hunters and naturalists. Also, just as an aside, when it comes to the word hunters or Jäger in German, it's not always necessarily what we think of when we think of a hunter, so like the poachers going around killing lions and tigers. It's kind of more like maybe a ranger, I guess you could say. Anyway, in this Bavarian handbook, there's actually a little drawing of a Tatzelwurm that kind of looks like a scaly cigar with little pointed teeth and stumpy legs. It kind of looks a bit like a bobtail lizard that you'd find in Australia. Now, this drawing isn't based on a creature that the author of the Bavarian handbook saw for himself, but rather on a description given to him by a friend who claimed to have shot a Tatzelwurm. And as we all know, you should always believe everything that your friends tell you. Nevertheless, the most common description of a Tatzelwurm is said to be a sort of stumpy-like lizard creature that's around 60 to 90 centimetres long. The most common colour that they're said to be is a type of brown, and they're said to have a very short and thick tail. Only some of the people who claim to have seen a Tatzelwurm say that it has scales, however a lot of people have heard it hiss. Their heads apparently have a very flat nose with very large round eyes. Some of the folklore surrounding this creature claims that they can jump up to 3 metres, which fits with the name that we mentioned earlier that references jumping. And in some stories, Tatzelwurms are said to be oddly aggressive and that they attack cattle, and that they're so venomous that even just their breath can kill you. The closest anyone has apparently come to having tangible evidence of this creature was via a discovery made by a peasant in 1828. It's said that this peasant had found a dried up Tatzelwurm in the marsh and that he'd pulled it out with the intention of bringing it to a professor he knew for further investigation. However, before he had managed to bring the professor to have a look at this supposed Tatzelwurm, the crows had eaten half of it and eventually they were only left with a skeleton. It was decided that they should send this skeleton to Heidelberg, which is a town in Germany where until this day there is still a research university. Unfortunately, before this skeleton reached Heidelberg, it mysteriously disappeared, lost to the world forever. Surprisingly, there have actually been a rather high number of reported sightings of this curious creature. One of the earliest recorded sightings is said to be from 1779, when a man from Austria was said to have run across 2 Tatzelwurms, which caused him to suffer such a shock that he ended up having a heart attack and died. How anyone knew what had scared him to the point of a fatal heart attack, considering the guy was dead and couldn't tell anyone, I'm not sure. Then again, as always when it comes to our myths and legends, technicalities don't really matter. But anyway, there was apparently another sighting in Austria in either 1883 or 84, where a guy said that he was just calmly watching one frolicking in the snow from the window of the restaurant in which he was enjoying his lunch. He claimed to have been watching this Tatzelwurm for a good 20 minutes, and he also said that he was absolutely certain that it only had 2 legs. In 1908, there was a professional hunter, or a Jäger, who claimed that he had battled with a Tatzelwurm that was 50 centimetres long, but his knife had barely been able to penetrate its skin, which was so tough and leathery. This unfortunately meant that the Tatzelwurm had managed to escape and retreat back into the cracks of the rocks, where the hunter was unable to get it. This close encounter caused the hunter to search for Tatzelwurms for the rest of his life. However, he never managed to run across one again. In 1921, it's claimed that a Tatzelwurm jumped 9 feet into the air towards 2 witnesses this time. This Tatzelwurm was said to be grey and had the head of a cat. This description is my favourite version. There's also the case of the Austrian schoolteacher who went so far as to give it a Latin name and everything. As per usual, I'm going to skip over the difficult to pronounce things, however, the Latin name was this. This Austrian schoolteacher gave the following account of how he came across this wonderful scientific discovery that is the Tatzelwurm. One fine spring morning towards the end of April in 1829, he was out exploring a cave on the top of this mountainy type thing. He'd stopped to have a short rest when suddenly he spotted this pure white, smooth, snake-like creature that was snoozing on the mouldy foliage that covered the ground. He claims that this creature's head was flat with two large eyes and that it also only had two small front feet. However, he also acknowledges that he might only have seen 2 feet because the creature was lying down. Now, the teacher claims that because he's so familiar with all the creatures that you can find in the Austrian forest, he knew instantly that this had to be a Tatzelwurm because he'd never seen a creature like it. He lunged to get it, but alas, he was too slow and the lizard, snake, creature managed to scuttle away. And just like our hunter from earlier, no matter how hard our teacher searched, he could never find the Tatzelwurm again. And the last so-called sighting that I'll share with you today is one from 1934, where a Swiss photographer named Balken claimed that he managed to accidentally photograph one. Now, as with all sorts of proof regarding legendary creatures, there are a few different versions to this story floating around in the wild, wild web. The most common version of the story is where Balken said that he had been attempting to photograph a rather uniquely, interestingly shaped tree stump. Then as the shutter of his camera clicked, this tree stump stood up and ran away. And because this is not a normal reaction for a tree stump, it said that what he actually saw was a Tatzelwurm. If you Google Balken 1934 photo, you can find this apparent photographic proof. However, surprise, surprise, it's highly suspected that this photo was most likely staged and it's probably just an image of a ceramic fish. Now, regarding all the other Tatzelwurm sightings, there are a few possible, more plausible explanations for what people might have seen. And I'm sure you can guess what some of them are. A type of snake is the number one explanation given, especially in those instances where the Tatzelwurm was said to have no feet. Different types of lizards or salamanders or skinks are also a very common explanation. A few mammals have also been put up for consideration, including otters, badgers, and pine martens. And to be honest, before I started reading up about all this stuff, I hadn't even heard of a pine marten before. However, when I looked it up, I was so glad I did because they are the most adorable little weasel-looking creature ever. One of the sources I was reading, a book called On the Track of Unknown Animals, actually took quite a clever approach to trying to determine whether or not a mythical creature like a Tatzelwurm could be something more common like a lizard, a mammal, or even a bird. Or at least I thought it was clever. Maybe it's just a common sense approach. But what the author did was take, say, the known number of amphibian or reptile species as per a study or a census, I guess, of a certain year, and then went on to compare those numbers to more recent censuses that were taken of amphibians, reptiles, mammals, and all the different animal species. So, for example, in 1886, there were around 3,400 known reptile and amphibian species. This number then jumps to 6,000 in 1960, which just goes to show how many unknown creatures there were, or are. And if you look at undiscovered mammals and birds, the jump in discovery is even higher, as the number goes from around about 10,000-ish known mammals and bird species in 1886 and then jumps to 37,000 discovered species by 1960. What this just goes to show is if there is such a large number of undiscovered species, the room for interpretation when somebody comes across something they haven't seen before is actually quite large. And I think that's what makes the Tatzelwurm different when we compare it to something, say, like an Aufhocker. People aren't necessarily claiming that it's a supernatural being, but rather that it's a type of undiscovered species that resides in the Alps. So along the same vein, I guess, as say a Yeti or maybe the Loch Ness Monster. And there we have it, a brief overview of what is a Tatzelwurm. Have you heard any interesting stories regarding this creature? Let me know in the comments down below, and while you're at it, please subscribe because I look forward to sharing even more boring history with you in the future.